Star Parker, and with another very special guest this week. I told you coming out of last week that I was going to have a friend in studio with me because you went through a history lesson last week with Dan Raviv. He was incredible. We're so concerned about Israel. All of us are getting all kinds of information about what's going on there. We're scared not just for the people that we know there. Many of us have been there. We have friends here that have relatives there. And then there's a lot of Christian work being done in what some call Palestine, Gaza. I mean, even the hospital that was born, it's called a Baptist hospital. The news lied about what really happened there. We get that now. But it was even a Baptist hospital. A lot of missionary work being done in Gaza because they did a horrible thing. They not only hired Hamas, then Hamas went in and slaughtered. So I'm going to have one of my dear friends, EJ Kimball. We've actually been together now. I think I've even interviewed you before. You're going to NRB. We've just kind of developed out this friendship because you're like my own personal expert in this area. And in fact, you're the first person that ever told me about that BDS movement that was happening on our campuses years ago. And now we're living in reality. So thank you for joining me, EJ. I don't want you to talk about the BDS now because I want to go through a column you just wrote. But let me tell you a little bit about EJ before we get into this, because he's an incredible expert. He runs EJK Strategies. He's the president there. It's a foreign policy and national security consulting firm. He's been 10 years doing that, based here in Washington, D.C. He recently was the director of the U.S. operations for Israeli Allies Foundation, where he built a niche for pro-Israel organizations. I know him as the director of the Christian engagement with Combating Antisemitism, the movement itself, right? What do you guys call it?
The Combat Antisemitism Movement, CAM.
CAM. Oh,
yes.
My goodness. He's been doing incredible work there to try to alert us on what's been going on. And my goodness, the unfortunate it is, it's been going on and going on. You've been blowing the trumpet and telling us, and now we're here. Then we look at October 7th and everyone's like, oh my God, what happened? But let me tell them a little bit more about you before we get into this discussion, because you're a national security consultant, so you're providing briefings and strategic expertise to the U.S. government agencies, including FBI, the CIA, the DOD. It's just got a long resume. Let me tell you a little bit about him personally. He's got a couple of kids, married to his wife, and you can't see his socks, but she buys him socks like they're real crazy. They're having fun in that area as well, while he's also an expert in these other areas. Graduate from Boston University, earned a Juris Doctorate from Western New England College, received a master's degree in international affairs from American University School of International Services. Told you, expert. So thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh my goodness, I don't even know where to begin. So what I think I'm going to do is just begin with your column. There are things I want to talk to you about. I want to know every detail about the BDS movement. So that means I have to have you on for the next 6 weeks. Are you available?
Yes.
They have been, when you first told me about it, I'm like, wait, they're doing what on these college campuses? And now to be able to get those kind of numbers out, we want to talk about that. But first, I want to talk about your column that was in the Jewish News Service. And I don't know who you wrote this for. The time for managing the conflict has come to an end.
Yes. So part of my work, I also work as the director of policy and strategic planning for the U.S. Israel Education Association,
okay,
a 501c3 organization that works to strengthen the U.S.-Israel collaboration.
Oh, good.
And we do work with members of Congress, okay, and with leaders in the field, not just in the Congress, but in the administration, working with Israeli leaders, and really with the Abraham Accords region now,
yes.
to strengthen the U.S.-Israel collaboration and in strengthening Israel's position within the region as well. So
that's good to know that work is even continuing. And I think that's another opportunity I had to interview you and get to know you better. It was at the Abraham Accords signing, and it's good to know. And I think a lot of people were thinking we were making progress and took their eye off the ball. You must be getting a lot of phone calls from those congressional leaders now saying, okay, now what? But I want to go through this with you because it's interesting, because you said the time for managing the conflict has come to an end. You said that Israel is done being the guarantor for the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Elaborate on that, because there are a lot of people now that are saying, well, why is Israel in there? What has been going on? How come they're holding these people captive? What are we hearing now? That it's an outdoor prison.
Right.
Last week we went through the history. Let's go into today. What is happening there? What has happened since 2005 and then in 2007?
So, as I'm sure your audience heard last week, in 2005, Israel withdrew from Gaza. They said they were occupying the territory, and they said, you know what, we're not going to occupy anymore. They literally took everything out.
Define occupy.
Meaning that the military controlled the territory.
Okay.
They were in charge.
Okay.
And
did Israeli people live there too?
Israeli people lived there.
Okay.
Palestinians were living there, but under Israeli military control.
Okay.
And Israel withdrew.
The military.
All the people, all the Israelis withdrew. Israel said, we're giving this over to you, to the Palestinians.
So that when you say withdrew, they packed their bag, like Fiddler on the Roof, they packed their bags and moved.
Not just packed their bags, but they actually took out the dead who were buried to move them out of the territory.
Oh my.
Now, why did they do that? Because they feared, I think rightfully, that Palestinians that ascribed to the same ideology as Hamas would dig up those dead Jews and parade around the bodies.
Oh my God.
So they removed all of those bodies. They took everything that was Jewish and Israeli and removed it from Gaza, and they turned to the Palestinians and said, this is for you. It's your land. They even left greenhouses there, functioning. As soon as the last soldiers left, those greenhouses were immediately destroyed.
By the people that were left there?
Yes.
But I wonder,
because it was a remnant of the Jews and of Israel.
There. Well, so, I just read a column, and we've known this, but everyone is now repeating and coming back on what has happened there. And this particular column pointed to how embedded it is in their schooling. And, because now we're to feel sorry that half of the people that live in Gaza are under 18, and 90% of them have been brought up in this worldview. So, it must be hard for people listening to say, wait, what? Why? This is rooted evil, and they've been training their people. And if you believe that kind of lie, you can become that hard-hearted that I could understand why you would also take your dead. But this is horrible. Yeah. And this was because it's in recent history. We were here in 2005. Okay, so you guys,
so
they took
Israel,
everything. They're gone.
Israel leaves. Palestinian Authority was governing. They held elections for their legislative chamber, and Hamas won the elections. And one misconception is people say that the people in Gaza voted for Hamas. Well, in the legislative elections, they did win, but it wasn't to take over Gaza. After Hamas won those legislative elections, the U.S. turned and said they're a terrorist organization. We're not going to provide funding to a Palestinian Authority-led government with a terrorist organization unless they renounce terrorism and at least say the right things regarding living with Israel. They refused to, eventually carried out a coup, Hamas,
so
and they carried out a coup in Gaza where they literally took members of the Palestinian Authority, threw them off of rooftops to seize control of Gaza, which for the last 16, 17 years has been a Hamas-controlled, terrorist-controlled enclave.
So they did then terrorize. So the people actually thought maybe this is a new beginning?
Because, the people there,
the
Palestinian Authority is a corrupt organization.
Okay.
And for years, they're taking money from the international community and primarily putting it into their pockets. Hamas came along, and they're operating there, and you go outside and you've got a pothole in front of your house, you have a street light out. Well, the Palestinian Authority isn't doing anything to fix that because they don't care. Hamas would fix that. So now when the people have a chance to vote, who are you going to vote for? The people who fixed your street lamp or the people who are corrupt? Now, of course, Hamas was also corrupt, but they were able to convince people that they would be a better option.
Yeah, that's where I get, even in last week's discussion, I think I get more resolve pro-Israel, because the excuses coming from areas like Gaza are the same excuses we hear in this country coming from our hardest zip codes, which is where we do most of our work here at CURE, trying to fix them. When people think that their problems are someone else's fault, they don't look internally to say, can we fix it, even if they have resources or don't have anything to fix it with, just to begin. Because I know, even through Gilder's book, The Israel Test, that when people pulled up out of that area, they did have to go somewhere else, and the somewhere else was barren land, and then they made it fruitful again. So we know that there are two sides to the story, and I'm glad to hear that, a little bit of that history. But now you're arguing in this article, we're done. We're not going to help you at all. Well, if they pulled out, how are they helping them?
So Hamas takes over, and they start immediately launching rockets at Israeli towns around Gaza. Okay. And so over the past 15, 16 years or so, there's been operations that Israel's carried out. It's been referred to as mow the grass policy.
Yes, I've heard that concept.
Hamas starts firing rockets, or they kidnap an Israeli that start firing rockets. Israel responds, degrade their capabilities for a while. You have a ceasefire. Hamas starts to rebuild. Rockets were always firing in between this ceasefire, but it was considered manageable. And Israel would then eventually mow the grass again. And during that time, Israel, because they needed to, and we saw what happened on October 7th, thank God this hadn't been something going on for the last 17 years, but we saw what would happen if Gazans under Hamas were able to cross that border. And Israel built a wall, a smart fence, tunnel detection technology. They had all the technological advances to watch people coming up to the border to prevent them from crossing into Israeli territory. And because of that, you needed access to get food, medicine, fuel, electricity into Gaza. Now, Israel controls, shares most of that border with Gaza, but Egypt also shares a border with Gaza.
But how come they didn't have their own? Why didn't they?
Well, we know why now, because Hamas would take all resources that they could and siphon it off to use to build their terror infrastructure, including the underground tunnel systems, where they would take cement, which could be used to build housing, it could be used to build storage facilities for the people, and instead used it to build terror tunnels.
Okay, so because I think that was one question that made people more sympathetic to the Palestinians, to say, when the first order of business was Israel turn off their water and their electricity, it's like, well, why did they control their water and their electricity?
Exactly. Because no one...
They couldn't get it anywhere else?
Well, because, correct. Not all of the water. Israel doesn't provide all of the water to Gaza. Israel provides a good amount of the electricity to Gaza, which, incidentally, Hamas would fire rockets at the Israeli electrical facilities and sometimes knock it out, which would knock out the power to Gaza.
Now I'm feeling sorry for those people. And I hope that when Israel finishes, this time they're not mowing the grass, they're taking it up out by the root, that the people there, these young people, start learning to live free, because they have to. They cannot keep letting this type of regime control them, and then they're just pitiful people trying to just get humanitarian aid. It's worse than the welfare state here. But I don't want to run out of time with you, but this is very sad what you're telling me.
So, regarding the conflict, Israel is fighting a war against Hamas in Gaza.
Now they are, okay, because now we jump from this, what you called managing the conflict.
That was the mowing the grass.
We're mowing the grass, we're still gonna provide you little things, we kind of have to live with you next door, but now you have crossed the line. 200 of you have come in here, and the slaughter. I have not been able to...
2,000,
I'm sorry, 2,000 have come. I can't even sleep, and I'm hoping that you can't sleep. I know the news wants to move on, and I know DC wants to move on, and we've got budget debates coming up, and we got this, and we got that, and we got election. But we shouldn't sleep right now. This is horrible. The pictures that the media got to see. it's horrible. They're showing us little things that we don't need to know. So now they have said, we're not mowing grass anymore. We're going in. Go to the next point here, because you said now we provided enough. Okay, no longer can they do that. It's a genocidal jihadist organization whose animating principle is the destruction of Israel and the murder of Jews worldwide. You make the case October 7th was but a taste of what Hamas would do to all Israelis and Jews around the world if they could. Is that what this is about? Is that why we should be engaged?
That is what this is about, and it's very interesting to look at Jews all around the world and looking at Jews in Israel. There was lots of debates in Israel during the past year over judicial reform and conscription in the military, and we saw those play out in the United States as well, with Jews here criticizing Israeli policies. Very fractured, I think, would be a fair way to describe Jews here and in Israel over the state. And there was questions, will there be a civil war in Israel? Mm-hmm. What happened on October 7th hit every Jew around the world. It didn't matter if you were Orthodox, if you were Reform, if you were an atheist. Mm-hmm. If you were Jewish and have that Jewish soul, mm-hmm. you felt that attack. Wow. And it evokes the memories for those who were alive of the Holocaust. Right. And for those of us who are not alive, who have heard the stories, who have seen the pictures, you can only imagine things. What happened on October 7th was worse in my mind because it was broadcast live. As you know,
Judaism hit everyone that's Jewish. I get it. The description, I think that the Jewish people every year after reading the Torah, then they go through the story of Esther, they go through the story of Ruth, they go through then Abigail. It's just like you have these moments where you have to say, why are we here? And I think that this is, why are we even a state? And we see that now, and I think America is seeing that. And I think when you talk about, well, what is the extent, why such hatred? Well, there is an evil. This is good and evil, as some are defining now. And that hatred is rooted in anti-God, and Jewish people represent God, whether we want them to or not, whether we believe the Bible or not. Every time someone sees a Jewish person, especially an Orthodox Jewish person, it's a reminder that paganism and secularism are in conflict with the creator of good and the creator of the world. But you're now defining how the world has changed. And you said there's no going back. Yes. There's not going back now as you're defining the heart of the Jewish people, especially here. I can just even imagine the new freshmen at college getting out of their parents' house and really ready to bubble up and come, and now can't even come outside just based on their last name. Define the world changing. Where is this moment beyond anger that these Arabs and Palestinians here are trying to be equal, in this moment, to say that even the White House can't even get out of their mouth that there's something wrong with anti-Semitism without also saying, yeah, but Islamophobia as well. So there's a moment here that we need to capture, and I want to hear that, EJ.
So what Israel has said very clearly is that Hamas must be obliterated militarily and politically, meaning not the ideology will disappear, because the ideology of Hamas is the same ideology as ISIS, the same ideology as Al-Qaeda, the Muslim Brotherhood, of which Hamas is a branch of. An ideology.
Oh, it is. I didn't know that. Okay.
An ideology cannot be destroyed. No. But the ability of Hamas to control territory and plan and carry out attacks against Israel is done. If Hamas exists with territory when this war is over, Israel has lost. Their deterrence will not be there. Hamas cannot be allowed to claim victory. It doesn't matter how many people die, how many Palestinians die. If Hamas can go out there at the end and stand on the ground and say, we fought back and resisted the Zionist occupiers, their terms, they will have won this war. And Israelis will not feel safe, and quite frankly, Jews will not feel safe.
So you're saying the world has changed, because we are hearing a lot of this insistence on ceasefire, to feel sorry. Now we're seeing the pictures of the Palestinians running and not having anything, and they haven't had anything in a long time. Sounds like Hamas just took over, so you have to at some point feel sorry. But we also need to recognize the danger for the world, not just the Jewish people, because I'm horrified to hear how many people think that it's okay for us to call out Jews.
Well, this administration and the U.S. Congress has been standing shoulder to shoulder with Israel. They recognize the threat that exists.
And you're confident in that?
I am very confident in that.
Okay, because a lot of people, and we have sitting legislators, we're going to Tlaib's district next week because of this, because in her district, they're holding them people's voices hostage to say, because you live in this congressional district, you can't even be a Christian. And I think that this is why I'm concerned as well, because, you know, we're connected to the Jews. This is our religion. And for people at Christian faith to be in that district, to not have a voice, we're going up there to give them a voice. We're having a press conference and a seminar just to discuss the other side of that story. This is not about Palestine and the enslavement from the Israelis. This is about humanity and the biblical worldview in our society. So tell me, I want to know the world change. What are you seeing there?
So what Israel has done differently in this war is they have shared the actual videos. They've shared the photos that were taken by Hamas as they carried out this brutality, this barbarity. And in the past, they've never done that out of respect for the victims. But this was so heinous, so atrocious, that no one with a moral conscience could see that and come to any other conclusion that this is a battle of good versus evil. This is not about an occupier and an oppressed, oppressor and an oppressed. This has nothing to do with that. This is a battle of good versus evil, and that savagery that happened is something that cannot exist in the world. It actually made ISIS look tame in comparison.
I know, but that's not the reality. The reality is that you have people in power here that are saying, this is exhilarating. I wish I could believe that when the majority of people, and it sounds like what you're saying is the majority here in Washington, in this administration and on Capitol Hill, are saying, oh my God, what are we up against? But there are some very loud voices that think that this is incredible victory for.
There are a lot of loud voices. Thankfully, and we'll talk later about what's happening on college campus, which I would say it's not just a small fringe of loud voices.
It is not.
But on Capitol Hill, it's a fringe of loud voices. But you have seen a shift among many who were looking for some sort of way for coexistence between Israel and Hamas control of Gaza. Maybe Hamas could be tamed, maybe they could be encouraged to have some sort of relationship with Israel. And what they have finally come to realize is a genocidal jihadist organization may tell you things that you want to hear, but who they are has not changed. And in fact, I've heard some members of Congress who have come out very clearly to say Hamas's charter, their whole purpose of being is to kill Jews. Which is great to recognize. 17 years ago when they took over Gaza, their charter was to kill Jews. And 35 years ago when they reformed their charter. So this isn't new. It's not like they changed their charter recently. This has been their whole MO since they began.
And now Israel's had enough.
And so Israel will destroy Hamas because they don't have a choice. It's a matter of national survival. And the United States, the Western world, has stood shoulder to shoulder with Israel. The attacks that Israel is carrying out, and there are civilians who are dying, clearly.
I know.
But the reason why they're dying is because Hamas won't let them leave.
Well, there's soldiers dying too. The people that yesterday were in college, they just had their weddings, they just had their first child, and now they're suited up. Because a lot of people don't understand that the Israeli children, they go from high school to military before they go off to college, because they understand this threat. And so I'm kind of glad to know that. I mean, I hate that this has happened, but you know, you get that place where it's just like, enough is enough.
And what isn't getting enough coverage is that I believe there's over 100,000, and that number may be way off, way low,
on the Hezbollah
Israelis who have been internally displaced.
Oh my!
Those that
I thought you were talking about the people up on the northern side.
Well, those that live in the south had to get out. They had to clear the area for this military campaign and for their safety. And then up in the north, near the Lebanese border, there's been a lot of concern about Hezbollah carrying out similar type infiltrations. So they have evacuated those villages up there. So you have all of these Israelis who have been displaced from their homes. No one's talking about that. No one's talking about the rockets that continuously are being fired at major population centers in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, but see, that's why I mean, I'm glad to hear you confident in the administration and the strength of the lobby here in the Congress, but I'm just not that confident that public sentiment won't change rapidly, because they're already having discussions about a two-state solution, and they haven't even allowed Israel the opportunity to kill off its enemy. And on top of that, just can't even seem to get the budget together to just say, what is a holdup to just get them what they need? So
I think your concerns are valid, because historically, this is what happens. The U.S. supports Israel. They have the right to do what they need to defend themselves. And then after a few days, a week or so, pressures on Israel, you have to have a ceasefire. What has happened so far, and I'm talking about this moment today while we're filming. Today, the administration is supporting Israel in its objective. Could that change? I don't know.
I don't think it will.
But they've been very strong and verbalized it and pushed back against those saying we need a ceasefire. They're putting the blame where it belongs. Well, civilian deaths are not because of Israeli strikes. It's because Hamas is operating from civilian areas, and they refuse to let those people leave.
Yeah, the narrative is still, the media is playing a role. And when we come back from break, I'm going to see if we can get into that. But I want to do the BDS as well. But I'm going to give you that. I mean, Blinken is Jewish. We know that. He's got to be concerned. Kamala Harris's husband is Jewish. This is a moment that we may not have seen. And so you have a lot of pressure, even if the administration or the pagans that are surrounding them want them to, hey, abandon Israel and go with the Palestinian messaging. I'm glad to hear you're thinking that it's not going to turn rapidly. And I don't think it matters to Bibi Netanyahu anyway. He's like, oh no, this is it. That's why I was so intrigued by your column, that we're not managing this conflict anymore. We'll come back after this very important message. I'm going to get into a little bit of this BDS. You may not have ever even heard of it. That's been happening on our college campuses, and now we're seeing the result. And EJ is going to explain that to us right after this. There's always redemption. There's always opportunity to change. And my special guest, EJ Kimball, has been telling us that this was that moment on October 7th for the world to change, that the world has changed. And thank you for pointing that out. I got to get into the BDS movement, that boycott, divest, sanctions movement that has been roaring on the campuses for years now. And for them to rally now to say, this is our moment, I want you to lead my audience and me through that. But before, you made a comment during the break, and I want you to elaborate on that, because you pointed out that the White House has been consistently with Israel on this and here. And I see that, I'm here, but also I'm a little bit concerned. But elaborate, because I'm thinking, wait a minute, with Kamala's husband being Jewish, with Blinken being Jewish, with Lloyd Austin, look, a lot of people have problems with what's going on in our military right now, especially all this secular wokeism. But this is an African-American man who has walked his way all the way to that top post with his history in this country. So we can identify with Israel in major ways in our own Black history. So tell me a little bit about what you're seeing there.
Yes, so it's very important to point out that the White House and the leadership have been speaking with moral clarity on this issue. This is not a both sides have a point here.
Moral clarity is not something you normally hear about Democrats in power, but okay.
And it's very important. And we need to praise things when we see them and applaud it.
Yeah, they have been. We're trying to say, wait, that couldn't have been the same person that just last week was passing all this bacon.
The spokesman for the National Security Council, John Kirby, was being questioned about comments that President Biden had made that he doesn't trust the number of deaths that are being reported out of the Palestinian Health Ministry because that's Hamas. And if Hamas is saying it, you can't trust it. Not saying that it could be true, but you have to presume that it's not. And he was asked that this was a harsh comment, and will he apologize for it? And he said no. He won't apologize, nor will I apologize. And then he went on to say, what's harsh, and I paraphrase here, what's harsh is Hamas holding civilians as human shields. Right. What's harsh is Hamas going into a music festival and slaughtering people. What's harsh is Hamas beheading babies. That is what's harsh. So this is,
you don't expect from, there has been a change in the world.
This is war.
This is war.
And this is a war that the world hasn't seen since World War II, which is a war.
Others are even pretending it's not even a war. Oh, no, they're trying not to use that word, but
they're hoping that it's not a war because what war means is the surrender or complete defeat of your enemy. Either your enemy surrenders and gives up their objectives, or you must completely defeat your enemy.
Well, now that's what Netanyahu's saying he's going to do, and the Israeli soldiers are behind him in doing that. And now what I'm hearing from you is the White House is also in agreement with this. We must do this because they're seeing that moment, and they are connecting Ukraine monies with the war in Israel money. So maybe it is a World War III that they just haven't said it out loud.
Well, and I think it's very important as sort of to talk about what's happening on college campuses, that in Washington, what we're seeing on Capitol Hill is bipartisanship on this issue and moral clarity. Now, there are some loud voices on the fringe pushing back on it, but
they can't go anywhere.
Overwhelming majority, and by overwhelming, I'm talking over 95% of the Congress. Understand what is at stake here and what must be done. I will argue, on the other hand, what we're seeing on college campuses is not a fringe. This has been a long problem, which you referenced at the beginning of the show, how we've talked about this movement, which the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, the BDS movement, which when we spoke years ago about this, and I shared with you, the BDS movement is not a movement about freeing Palestinians to have freedom and independence. It is a movement seeking the destruction of Israel and the Jewish state. And before we move on,
but it's big. Do you think that? I mean, all of these kids can't buy that idea. I know that when we had the BLM movement, the Black Lives Matters movement, they had their Marxist agenda, but most of the people rioting had a variety of ideas about what was going on. Some of them were making $25 an hour to be out there protesting, $35 if you wear the t-shirt. So everyone can't be in agreement with this, or can they?
No, they're not in agreement with this. Many have no idea what they're actually saying.
They're just out there.
So we've seen these rallies where they're free Palestine rallies, and they chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And so I want to talk just for a quick moment to explain to the audience here what the term Palestine refers to, because it's an important distinction to make. Palestine was the name given to the territory by the Romans after the destruction of the temple 2,000 years ago, when they conquered the land and Jews were mostly expelled. the Romans wanted to get rid of any reference to the Jewish presence there. And so they named the territory Palestina, which became Palestine. If you fast forward to the end of World War I, when the Ottoman Empire, which had controlled the territory now known as Israel and Jordan and Syria and all these areas, when that dissolved, the world powers created these mandates for future states for the peoples in the area. So there was a mandate for Syria, which became the country we know today as Syria. Okay. There was a mandate for Palestine created that the British were to oversee, and the purpose of it was to create a homeland for the Jewish people. Why did they call it Mandate for Palestine? Because that's what the territory had been referred to for 2,000 years.
Okay.
That territory, when they were trying to come up with, well, how should we carve out that territory, where did they look? They looked to the Bible.
Wow.
And they took
Palestine,
the biblical Israel, and the territory that they carved out included the territory today known as Jordan. The British made a deal, Winston Churchill made a deal with the Hashemite kingdom, and everything east of the Jordan River became the country we know today as Jordan. So,
well, wait, let me make sure I understand. Okay, so now we've got the river. Now West Bank today was over here in Jordan.
Well, the West Bank, which we know today, is not in Jordan. That's in the...
Not anymore,
Jordan occupied it. They controlled it.
Okay, so now we're going up to 67.
Six-day war. Israel defeats all of the Arab armies. They get control of the Golan Heights from Syria, Gaza, and the Sinai Desert from Egypt, and the entire West Bank falls under Israeli control. And since then, you had a peace deal with Jordan. You had a peace deal with Egypt where Israel gave back the Sinai Desert, but they also tried to give back Gaza, but Egypt said, we don't want it. Now,
because that means they would have had also the people.
Yes. Now, if you notice, at no point have I talked about the state of Palestine.
Well, there isn't a state of Palestine.
So there has never been a state of Palestine. What there has been is an aspiration for a Palestinian state.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about last week with our guests. But they keep rejecting.
Right. So when we talk about Gaza and we talk about the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and we talk about those Palestinian-controlled territories, but it's not a state. It's not Palestine.
Well, we understand that, Egypt, but then why is it that on our campuses there's this insistence that it needs to be a state? Why is there this insistence that, first of all, that it was taken away, occupied, and needs to become what it used to be, which we're hearing from you and our historian journalist last week, it never was.
Right, because it's a narrative, and people don't study the history. They keep being told this, and so they start to believe it. And so what's happening on these campuses, this chant, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. When they say Palestine, they're not referring to Gaza and the West Bank. They're referring to the entire territory from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, which is the state of Israel. They are not about statehood for Palestinians. They are about the destruction of the Jewish state. It is genocidal chant. And so you've got college kids who they don't know what they're doing. They think this is a liberal cause. Right. They're fighting the oppressed.
Like even the ones that were here last week, they had, it was Jewish was in their name. And they're breaking into the Capitol. It's just like, where's the misunderstanding here? But I think that what you're explaining in history is important, and what you were saying earlier about how the state of Israel now, very cleverly, this is God's wisdom, is getting the truth out. They're actually showing us the pictures, and they're kind of dribbling it out, I guess you could say, because they don't want the narrative to change to where now we're going to start hearing, and we already are starting to hear about the misery that the people in Gaza are having. It is challenging. It is displacing. It is heartstring. But now you're pointing out that, but in Israel, the same thing is happening. We're at war.
Right. And so what's happening on college campuses now with groups like Students for Justice in Palestine, they're not holding rallies in support of the plight of the Palestinian people. They're holding rallies supporting Hamas. That is providing support for a U.S. and internationally designated terrorist organization.
Well, this is going to be a problem for this administration if they really plan to stick to the side of Israel and to promote our American interests abroad, because these are their people, and I'm hoping that they're not getting any sleep at night either, because this is a big decision to be made of how we're going to do this. Because, as you told me years ago, that boycott, divest, sanction is all about Israel. Don't let them exist. This is an apartheid state, on and on and on, and people have bought it. It's not just the youth that we're seeing today. There's a generation of those youth who listen to this that are now in major corporations. They have power, if you will. They have influence. They have monies.
And the part of this that's really sad is those that are promoting this boycott movement, the people that get harmed the most are Palestinians who have the opportunity to work in Israeli factories, because they're the ones who are able to actually make more money than they would working in a Palestinian Authority-controlled territory. So the actual harm isn't being done to Israel.
Yeah, and they're not, and that's another thing that I think, and we're getting all off subject now, but that I've been there enough times to see how integrated the society is. I mean, even the Jewish people themselves, how diverse they are. I took one picture because that girl was blacker than me and had a rifle on her back because she was just finishing her studies. The girl, she could have been 17 years old, and she's just finishing her studies on how to war. And what they then do is they go up to Masada and they sit there and they have to hear that story. And in fact, do you know the story of Masada? I want you to tell our people, because a lot of people don't know what they do there to protect themselves, to stay strong as a people that just want to live free.
Well, before that, I want to just talk a moment about this movement on college campuses.
Okay, yeah.
Because these movements that are calling out Israel as an apartheid state, as you just said, your example shows that is not what apartheid looks like.
No.
The previous government in Israel, before this current Netanyahu-led government, it had an Arab party in the governing coalition. I'm pretty sure that is not the definition of apartheid.
No, I've been there. I see how the people live. There's poverty. Yes, there's poverty, but there's poverty everywhere.
And what has been completely destroyed is this narrative that you can be anti-Zionist, meaning you are against the idea of a Jewish state, or this yearning for statehood, the Zionist movement in the late 19th century that's credited with the reestablishment of the Jewish state, that you can be anti-Zionist but not anti-Semitic, that you don't hate Jews, it's the Jewish state that's the issue. And what has happened is, that has been just a cover for Jew hatred. And with the Combat Antisemitism Movement, the work that we do to educate people all around the world is that there is a definition of anti-Semitism that was created by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, a network of countries that came together and experts to put together a definition of anti-Semitism, but it also includes 11 contemporary examples of what may be anti-Semitism. And one of the big issues is when you are holding Israel to a double standard. When you are singling out Israel to a standard that no other country in the world is held to, that may be anti-Semitism.
Well, I think that's a positive, because that's what, every time we see into that UN and their discussions, we hear that, because
it's all a double standard.
It is.
And the important thing is to recognize that historically, when there was no state of Israel, anti-Semitism was reflected as the Jews living amongst us are the problem. And so Jews became targets for anti-Semitism. With the state of Israel, you've just replaced people with state. It's the Jewish state living amongst us that is the problem, which is why there were conspiracy theories that Israel created COVID.
Right. Well, we've heard Israel was behind 9/11. We've heard all of the conspiracy theories, and unfortunately,
that
in the
Israel faked the attack by Hamas.
Right. And the thing is, well, that's why I'm glad they're now showing us the pictures, because I've got people right here, I work in media, that are saying, no, it didn't really happen. It didn't really happen. Especially to the extent that they said. But so we get that, and I think that most people, at least now, their eyes are open that anytime you say state of Israel, you're talking about Jewish people. I mean, all over the world now, you have all of these major protests that are very visual, saying that we don't want Jews coming near us. We saw it at that Russian airport, so it's no need of us trying to pretend that the reality hasn't hit us.
Yeah, that was nothing less than an attempted pogrom against the Jewish people.
I had to look up that word pogrom. I'd not heard it before.
And it's very important for your audience to know that, and the reason why we exist, the Combat Antisemitism Movement, we exist because this issue cannot be a Jewish-only issue. Jews in America are being threatened constantly.
Right. But I don't think that it is.
And what we've seen in some of the videos, which has been encouraging, is you see non-Jews. You may have seen some of the videos where pictures of hostages have been put up on streets, and you have people ripping them down. And what has been encouraging to see is the non-Jews confronting these people and saying, what are you doing?
Well, I think that this is another reality that will come to the Jewish people, what the Christian community believes about all of this, because we are always been there, here, there, toured there, but now they're seeing that expression and how important it is, because our religion is tied to this religion. I mean, we have Romans, a couple of chapters that speaks about how we were grafted in to this God reality. So we kind of know that, but the campuses, people are afraid, and I'm kind of glad others are taking their monies away. They're starting to say, wait a minute, if you're really supporting this, then I'm not going to give you money anymore. And there's a whole discussion about whether that's anti-free speech. However, this realigning is going on, and I'm very, very encouraged by it, because I think that there has been too much of the minority groups, the Jewish minority group, the Black minority groups, the Latino minority groups, who have bought into this narrative and lie that it's an us against them, and they put the Jewish people in the them, who are now the oppressors, and yet the reality of Jewish life is coming to bear. We're starting to see what they've been putting up with since they were replaced there in 1948, because I'm one of those that think, well, it's not the first time for a Jewish state. I mean, you go way back in history.
The recreation
of that
Jewish state.
And in fact, thanks to fracking, now we can go under that dome that they put up there, and they're finding biblical truth. The last time I was there, they just discovered something else that affirms the scripture, and this is a healthy thing. But so before we leave, though, I do want you to speak into the Masada moment, because this is where I think the reality hit for me. Of why we hear the Jewish community around the world say never again, never again. So could you just elaborate on that?
You had Jews who had fled from the Romans up on top of Masada and were holding out up there. And they fought off the Romans for, you'll know a lot better than me, a lot of the details, but for years, fighting them off, and they laid siege. So they had the storage facilities up there with food and water and the ability to survive as long as they could to fight off the Romans. Eventually, they came, and those that remained committed suicide.
And have very hard decisions. Well, actually, I think
because rather than be taken back into bondage.
Well, not just bondage. From what the story and legend tells us is that they had this moment similar to October 7th, to where they knew that their children would be killed and their wives would be raped, and they had to, but yet their religion does not allow for suicide. It just, so they had a decision to make, and for the pulling straws to say, who gets to kill off their family? This is crazy. And yet it's real history. And now we're living that moment. And that's why I think that with the Prime Minister of Israel to say, never again, and we mean it this time. That's why I think, EJ, your column just really touched my heart, because you spoke to, we have been managing this thing since 48. We won a little bit in 67. God's mercy was upon us. We won. We kept the territory. Just the pressure to give it back. I mentioned last week even where the then Prime Minister Golda Meir said, they've got to stop hating us. They got to start loving their own children, and then this will stop. It still didn't stop. It still didn't stop. Israel kept growing. But there are some questions that Israel started, everyone wants to talk about the democracy there, and now this is the common factor. And yet I think that more important is the truth is there. This is, the state of Israel is a biblical country, and so is America. And we've been grafted in to this truth about how the world works, which includes personal responsibility, includes loving your neighbor, and yet we have this enemy that's there. And so I just want you to spend a few minutes just telling us, internally, in your internal, where we go. What is the next step for us? You're telling us that they cannot do this again. We're gonna wipe them out. But you also pointed out in that column what that next step should be internationally. Right. Here's what we need to do as a community in the same earth. Yeah. And then you also pointed out another step that for the aid for those that are being hurt, those Palestinians.
So first, the reason the state of Israel exists and is so important that it must exist is exactly what happened on October 7th. It's that after such a heinous attack, that there's the ability of a state to fight off these enemies of the Jews. That's a lesson from the Holocaust, where Jews didn't have that ability to fight for themselves and protect themselves. Right. So what I point in the article is Israel has laid out a 3-point plan. They're doing the first one now, the military campaign to eliminate Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists from the territory. The second stage of that is going to be removing pockets of resistance, these Hamas elements that melt back into the population, but that are trying to still carry out their jihad. And then the third stage, what they say, is a new security regime, which will be where Israel says, we're out. We're not going to be the ones responsible, because there will be a territory here that
and I don't think anyone expects them to.
Right.
Well, so what should we do? Because I don't want to run out of.
So the international,
and I'm glad you made that point. They don't want to be. They probably didn't want to be the first time.
Let me put this: the international community seems to be supportive that Hamas needs to go.
Right.
They are supportive that the people in Gaza need to be protected, and that they need vast humanitarian aid. Right. And you can't have all three.
No. Well, not right now, but you pointed out the perfect world.
Right. What needs to happen,
like especially after.
More pressure needs to be put on the Egyptians to allow those that want to get out of Gaza to go into the northern Sinai. Then humanitarian aid can be provided.
Yeah, that's in the immediate. And I think I read something that Egypt they're in negotiations for that.
Yes.
Let's pass that, because now the pressure is on to say, what's next? What's next? What is next for the people there? If you get a rebirth, if you get a restart in a perfect world, I cannot buy the idea that they don't have the capacity to self-govern. What should we as an international community do so that they never have a Hamas moment themselves?
You need when Israel says a new security regime, I believe that encompasses everything. That includes the educational system.
Okay.
That means that the textbooks that are being used are not the same textbooks that the Palestinian Authority
creates. Yeah, but who's going to control all this? Israel said, we're not us, we're out of here.
Well, the time that it takes for them to clear out those pockets of resistance is when this educational system needs to change. And those that are going to provide the funding to rebuild Gaza need to insist that the educational system is one that promotes coexistence in a positive future for being contributors to the world, rather than the education system that they've had, which breeds resentment, contempt, hatred, which led to the barbarity that we saw on the 7th of October.
It's true, and we're going to run out of time here, so I know I have to have you back on, because it's not going to be over anytime soon, and we know that. But also, one of the things that you pointed out that I really appreciated was there are enough countries around Israel that can help that happen.
Yes.
And I think that this is the role that the door that the Abraham Accords has opened up for us to have this discussion. So I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful. It's tragic, it's ugly, but tomorrow is a better day. I mean, we have to trust in that. I've been born again, so I know that you can take real ugly and make it beautiful, and God does that. And we're going to pray continuously for the people of Israel, but we're going to pray for the least of these two that are sitting there saying, what happened? That 3-year-old, that 5-year-old. And now we can start the dialogue about a better world for those that are there. Hard tonight. Weeping comes, but joy in the morning. That's our prayer for the people of Palestine. EJ, thank you so much for being here with me. I just, every time you talk, I'm just like, you open up more questions that I have for that region. So I'm gonna have you back on real soon.
Happy to do it. Thank you.
Hey, remember that we sort through the noise of the news here on Cure America to find some truth. You heard some truth today, and go study. Just make sure that you understand not just the history, but what the Bible says about this time that we're in. It's a hard season for us. It's very difficult for many of us that really care about the people of Israel and the Bible of Israel. We just really need to be on one accord in our messaging here in the United States so that people will be free, that as the Israelis go through this opportunity to really clean out Hamas, that it opens up the door for a better Middle East. Make sure you go to Cure's website, curepolicy.org. That's how I bring this to you, Cure Americas, by your gifts. We're looking for a few more monthly supporters, people that have $50, $100, $10, that they can do monthly so that we can keep branching out our show. We're right now in 6 different markets on platforms and networks, and we're just picking up very soon here, one in Florida. We're excited about that one. We're still praying for and working with the Ethiopian network to open up, but we cannot do any of it without your generosity. We're 501c3. All of your gifts are tax deductible. And just keep in mind, as I try to remind you every week and remind myself of Ecclesiastes 12:13, the conclusion of the matter, fear God, keep his commandments. That's it.
We stand with you here in America.
We pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
We stand with you, we love you, and we're praying for you.
We're just praying that God will strengthen and comfort and be with you and remind you that he's present.
We're praying for the peace of Jerusalem, and we know that God is going to be with you.
We stand with you here in America. Theologically, Paul, the first century Jew, said that from you came the oracles of God. The oracles of God are not in Delphi, in Greece, or anywhere else. You have the very word of God. And so as we think of standing with you, not only theologically, but practically, what I'm saying is this. God has promised to Israel, promised to Abraham, land, seed, and blessing. Israel holds the deed to the land, regardless of who steals it from him or them or tries to take it from them. The seed that God promised to Abraham was from his descendants. We have the covenants, we have Moses, we have the prophets. And Paul even says we have Jesus Christ, who's a descendant and a Jew, who would be the Savior of the world. Also, the blessing that God promised to Abraham, he said, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. So it doesn't matter if it's the Amalekites, it doesn't matter if it's Hezbollah or Hamas or any enemy of Israel. Those who curse Israel will be cursed, and one day they'll stand before God, and it's not Allah, it will be Jehovah God. So we're standing with you.
I want to just take a moment to say to our brothers and sisters in Israel, all throughout Israel, we've been to Israel 2 times, and we continually pray for Israel. We pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And we want you to know that we love you, that we're standing with you, and that God is with you.
And I want Israel to know that we stand with you, we love you, and we're praying for you. The Word of God tells us that God will bless those who bless Israel, and he will curse those who curse Israel. So we stand with Israel, we're praying for Israel, and we pray for victory in the name of Jesus for Israel.
We want to send a message there because we have some family and friends. When the war first broke out and Hamas attacked them, she was in the northern region. But she called and let us know she was okay, but also called and let us know that people in America do know how hard it was hit. While the media was saying there was only 2,500 missiles that were fired, we found out there was over 23,000 from people that was living in Israel. And she was one of them that got word back to us that she was okay. And then a couple days later after that, the Norfolk region got hit and her neighborhoods got hit. And every one of us is praying. Every one of us have that hope. We're praying for the peace of Jerusalem. And we know that God is going to be with you. And we praise God for God using Israel so many times before. And it's because of him that even the Messiah came through. And so Christians are with you 100%. We want to say to the nation Israel, God has your back, and we're standing right with the Lord. Be encouraged. We do know what's happening.